People always assume the most dangerous moments in life arrive with sirens, warnings, or premonitions, but the truth is, they slip in quietly. The way dusk bleeds into night so gradually that you don't realize darkness has swallowed you until you can no longer see your own hands. That is how the moment found me, not as a shout, not as a scream, but as a strange stillness in the air, the kind that makes birds pause mid-song and mothers lift their heads from their phones. Before we go further, if you're already feeling the tension building and you're drawn to stories about courage colliding with fate, go ahead and like and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to be here for what comes next. And while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels, because the truth is, what happened that afternoon by the Han River changed more than my life. It changed the life of someone far more important than I could have ever imagined. It started as an ordinary spring day, the kind where Seoul's air is crisp enough to wake the senses, but warm enough to make you slow down and savor the sun, and I had planted myself on a wooden bench near the riverside playground, grading worksheets from the immigrant kids I tutored. I was new to the city, still learning how the pulse of Seoul thrummed beneath its glossy skyline, still adjusting to being the only Black woman in most spaces, and the calm rhythm of small routines helped me feel grounded. Across from me, a little boy, maybe 8 or 9, stood feeding crumbs to pigeons. I'd seen him twice before, a quiet child with soft eyes and the kind of expensive, perfectly pressed clothes that hinted he had parents who ironed everything, even play clothes. He had this way of tilting his head when he watched the birds, as if he understood them in a way the rest of us didn't. I remember thinking he seemed lonely in a way that didn't come from being alone. I didn't know his name yet, or who he was, or what he carried with him, but I would soon learn that fate had already stitched our lives together long before I recognized the pattern. It happened when the breeze shifted, sharp, cold, unsettling. I looked up from my papers and saw him, a man stumbling from behind the public restroom structure. He looked wrong, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong picture, clothes dirty and torn, hair wild, eyes jittering across the playground with a feverish desperation that set every instinct in my body on high alert. Parents nearby glanced at him, then quickly looked away, the way people do when something feels off, but they hope someone else will deal with it. I watched as he locked his eyes onto the boy, and for a split second, the world narrowed to a straight line between predator and prey. Before the scream even left my throat, he lunged. The knife, small, silver, sickeningly bright, caught the sunlight, and mothers grabbed their children, scattering like startled birds. But the little boy froze. Completely. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He didn't even blink. I don't remember standing. I don't remember dropping my papers. I only remember running, my legs moving without permission, my heart slamming hard against my ribs, as though the ground itself pushed me forward. The man reached the boy just as I shoved myself between them, arms spread wide, praying my body could hold the force I knew was coming. Run! I shouted at the boy, but instead he clutched my sleeve, trembling, rooted in terror. The man swung at me, the knife flashing so close I felt the cold whisper of metal brush my arm. I grabbed his wrist with both hands, my fingers burning with the strain as I fought to keep the blade away from the small body behind me. His strength was wild, erratic. He snarled words I couldn't understand, spit flying, eyes blazing with an unhinged fury. My feet dug into the ground, sliding in the gravel as I used my entire weight to restrain him. Every second stretched impossibly long, my arms shaking violently, my breath tearing from my chest in short, desperate bursts. I felt the boy behind me, curled into my back, tiny hands clinging to the fabric of my jacket as though I were the only solid thing left in the world. I couldn't let him go. Not for a second. A scream ripped through the air, someone calling for security, and then, finally, the thunder of footsteps. 2 uniformed officers slammed into the attacker, dragging him to the ground as he kicked and cursed. I stumbled back, gasping, my legs buckling beneath me. The boy collapsed against me, his small body shaking uncontrollably as I wrapped my arms around him, whispering, "It's okay, you're safe. I've got you. Just breathe, sweetheart, breathe." But he didn't let go. Not even when the officers hauled the attacker away. Not even when a crowd formed around us, buzzing with shocked whispers and frantic questions. And then, just as my own heartbeat finally began to slow, a fleet of black SUVs screeched to a halt at the edge of the park, and a tall Korean man in a sharp suit sprinted across the pavement like he was running for his life. His eyes, dark with panic, locked onto the child. "Min-jae," he shouted, voice cracking. The boy lifted his head at the familiar voice and burst into tears. "Appa." The man dropped to his knees, pulling the child into his arms with a desperation I had never seen before. Then he looked up at me, and the expression that flickered across his face stole the breath from my lungs. Recognition, shock, gratitude, and something deeper I couldn't name. "Ma'am," he said, voice unsteady. "You saved my son." And in that moment, before I even knew his name, before I understood the weight of the child I had shielded, I felt it. The first pull of a story so big, so tangled with danger and destiny, that everything in my life before this moment would soon feel like a prologue. The moment the man, Min-jae's father, spoke those words, the air around us shifted, pulling tight like a string drawn too far, as if the world itself understood we had crossed a boundary we couldn't step back over. And before I could even gather my breath or offer him some awkward reassurance that anyone would have done the same, a ring of black-suited security agents formed around us with the precision of a military operation. They weren't just escorting us, they were extracting us. The father stood, still holding the trembling boy against his chest, and suddenly I saw him clearly, jaw clenched with the kind of anger born from fear, eyes sharp and assessing even through his panic, posture carrying a command he didn't have to speak out loud. He wasn't simply a wealthy parent. He was someone whose presence spent the space around him. "We need to move," he ordered, and though the command wasn't aimed at me, one of the guards nudged me gently, urging me to follow. My legs moved on instinct as we were rushed toward the SUVs, the chaos of the playground fading behind us. Children stared. Parents whispered. Someone had recorded the entire attack, I realized, phones lifting as we passed, slow-motion evidence of a moment that had nearly altered a boy's future forever. As I slid into the back seat beside the father and his still sobbing son, my heartbeat thumped so loudly I thought for sure they could hear it. The door slammed shut, locking with a mechanical click that sounded far too final, and then the convoy lurched forward, swallowing us into the streets of Seoul with frightening speed. For a few minutes, no one spoke. The boy, his face buried in his father's collar, hiccuped through fading tears. The father held him close with one arm while gripping the handle above the window with the other, knuckles white, his gaze scanning every passing vehicle as if expecting danger to leap out at any moment. Finally, he turned to me, and the gratitude in his expression was nearly overshadowed by something sharper, almost suspicious, like he was trying to understand who I was, why I was there, and why fate had delivered me into a moment that should have belonged only to him. "I'm Kang Dae-san," he said quietly, his voice low, steady now, as though he'd forced his emotions back behind a wall made of sheer will. The name registered in my mind slowly, like a puzzle piece snapping into place. KDS International, one of the biggest multinational tech conglomerates in Asia, constantly in the news. Helmed by a CEO known for ruthlessness in boardrooms and near-mythical privacy outside of them. A man whose face was rarely seen except in carefully controlled, meticulously timed public appearances. And here he sat, hair mussed by fear and wind, suit wrinkled from kneeling in the dirt, clutching his son like the boy was his lifeline. I felt suddenly out of place, like a stranger who had stepped into the middle of someone else's storm. "Thank you," he said again, voice roughened by sincerity this time. "You shielded him with your body. You could have been hurt." I shrugged, though my hands still trembled. "It was instinct." "Instinct," he repeated softly, studying me in a way that made the small space feel too warm. "Most people's instinct is to run from danger, not toward it." I didn't know how to respond, so I simply looked out the window as the city blurred past, endless glass towers and narrow alleys and neon signs flashing early in the afternoon, all smearing together like paint dragged across a wet canvas. But then Min-jae shifted, turning his face just enough for me to see his wide, glistening eyes. He reached out with a small hand and touched my wrist, his fingers trembling, but his grip purposeful, as if he needed reassurance that I was still there, the way he'd clung to me during the attack. "Gomawo," he whispered in Korean. "Thank you." Something inside me cracked a little at the earnestness of that tiny voice. Before I could answer, the SUV slowed, merging onto a private road, lined with towering trees that led to a modern glass fortress overlooking the Han River. Even through my dazed state, I realized this wasn't a hotel or temporary safe house. This was someone's real home, a sanctuary built to withstand storms and enemies both visible and hidden. As we pulled into an underground entrance, guards surrounded the vehicle, one opening the door while two others scanned the dimly lit garage for threats. "You're safe now," Daesung murmured to his son, smoothing the boy's hair. "Appa's here." Then, he surprised me by taking my elbow gently, guiding me out of the car as though I were someone fragile, someone important, someone who had just saved something priceless to him, which, I realized, I had. We entered a private elevator, metal doors sliding shut with a whisper. The moment they closed, the air shifted again, this time with the heavy weight of truth that had been pressing against his throat since the attack. "That wasn't a random man," he said, voice low enough that it felt like a confession meant only for the metal walls to hear. My stomach dropped. He continued. "He was hired." My pulse spiked. "Hired? To attack your son?" He nodded slowly, jaw tightening. "My life is complicated. And Minjae's safety is tied to battles most people will never see." I swallowed hard. Who would do something like that? His eyes lifted to mine, and the hollow shadow in them made my skin crawl. People who want to control me. People who think hurting my son will weaken me. For the first time since the attack, true fear, not adrenaline, not shock, crept through me, cold and slow, wrapping around my spine. "I shouldn't have involved you," he said, almost regretful. "But once you saved him, once he clung to you," he looked down at the boy, who still refused to let go of my hand. "There was no way to leave you behind. Not safely." The elevator chimed softly as the doors opened to reveal a penthouse so immaculate, so breathtaking, it might have been carved out of the sky. But none of its beauty mattered, because the moment we stepped inside, a new truth settled over me with the weight of destiny. I had stepped into something far bigger than myself. Something dangerous. Something inescapably tied to the little boy who still held my hand as though he'd known me forever. And as Daesung closed the door behind us with a soft, final click, I realized with startling clarity, whatever had begun at that playground wasn't over. It was only just beginning. If I had thought stepping into that penthouse marked the peak of the day's chaos, I was wrong, because what followed didn't slow the pulse of the afternoon, it intensified it, stretched it, reshaped it until every breath felt like it carried consequences far larger than anything I'd signed up for. And as I crossed the threshold into that vast glass-walled world perched above the city, I felt the invisible lines of my life and theirs weaving together in ways that were becoming impossible to untangle. The interior was breathtaking in a cold, curated way, steel beams, pale marble, floor-to-ceiling windows, but what struck me wasn't luxury. It was the absence of warmth. Like the space had been designed to look perfect in magazines, but never truly lived in, and somehow that hollowness made sense for a man like Kang Daesan, someone who carried entire empires quietly on his shoulders. Minjae clung to my side as if his small body had only just learned what safety could feel like, and when Daesung gently tried to pry his son's fingers from mine, the boy whimpered and tightened his grip, his eyes flicking between us in silent plea. Daesung exhaled softly, a sound not of frustration but resignation, and I realized he wasn't surprised, not by the boy's fear, nor by the fact that he trusted a stranger more easily than he trusted the army of professionals assigned to protect him. "Let him," I murmured, and something in his expression softened into gratitude so raw it almost hurt to look at. He motioned for us to follow him deeper inside, past sleek hallways and rooms that seemed too pristine to ever have held laughter, and as we entered what appeared to be a private study, he turned to face me fully, leaning one hand on the desk like he needed the support. "You need to know the truth," he said, each word deliberate, heavy. "The attack wasn't just a message, it was an escalation. They're done warning me. They want leverage. I swallowed. Leverage. His gaze flicked to the boy curled against me. Him. The room felt suddenly too small, too fragile for the danger pressing in around us. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. My late wife's family never accepted me. They believed she married beneath their stature. When she passed, they turned their grief into obsession. They won her inheritance back, and in Korea, custody battles involving high-profile heirs can become weaponized. He hesitated, the next words clearly painful for him. They believe that if they take Min-jae, they take everything attached to him. At that, the boy's small fingers tightened around mine again, and something protective and fierce unfurled inside me, an instinct far older than fear. So today wasn't about killing him, I said quietly. It was about taking him. The look he gave me confirmed what he couldn't bring himself to say aloud. Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one, Seoul glowing like a constellation spread across the earth, and the silence between us thickened with unspoken understanding. Nothing about this moment was accidental. Nothing about our meeting was random. And yet, something else lingered beneath the tension, something quieter, more dangerous in its own right, because it had the shape of connection. You saved his life, Daesung said, closer now, voice low. But you also became part of the story. They know your face. They know you interfered. My breath stalled. Are you saying I'm in danger? His jaw clenched. I'm saying I won't let anything happen to you. The certainty in his tone startled me. No hesitation, no half measures, just a vow spoken like an oath carved into stone. You don't even know me, I whispered. He held my gaze, and for the first time I noticed the weariness in his eyes, the exhaustion of a man who hadn't slept peacefully in years, who'd been fighting battles alone and losing pieces of himself along the way. I know you ran toward my son when everyone else ran away, he said. I know he trusts you. And I know that matters more than anything I could ever learn from a background check. My chest tightened in a way I wasn't prepared for, and before I could respond, Min-jae lifted his face toward mine, his eyes still glassy from tears. Stay, he whispered. One word, fragile as tissue, powerful as thunder. Daesung closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if the sound both healed and broke him. I won't ask you to stay, he said softly, but I'll be honest, I don't want to let you go back out there alone. Not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow either. He took a slow breath, searching for words that didn't exist. But this isn't a simple story. If you stay, even just for tonight, you won't be stepping out of danger, you'll be stepping deeper into it. I looked down at Min-jae, his cheek pressed into my side, his tiny hand holding my wrist like an anchor. Then I looked back at the man who hadn't asked for help but desperately needed it, even if he didn't know how to say so. And in that moment, the decision came with startling clarity. I'm not abandoning him, I said. Not after today. Relief flickered through Daesung's features, quick and unguarded, but he hid it almost instantly behind the calm facade of a man accustomed to burying his emotions beneath steel and responsibility. He nodded slowly. Then I'll protect both of you. He approached, stopping just a breath away, the faint scent of cedar and rain clinging to his clothes. For a heartbeat, the world fell silent, not with fear this time, but with something fragile and electric, something that hummed beneath the surface like the first crack of lightning before a summer storm. Whatever happens next, he murmured, you're not alone. And as night settled over Seoul, wrapping its shadows around the glass tower we stood in, I felt the truth of his promise settle into my bones with a weight that was terrifying and strangely comforting. I hadn't chosen this world. I hadn't asked for its danger or its power or its secrets. But I had chosen the boy who clung to me with quiet trust. And, because of that, I had chosen the man who would burn the world down before letting harm touch him again. Whatever story we were stepping into now, one thing was clear, it wouldn't end with fear. It would end with the unshakable truth of what we protect, and what ends up protecting us.